Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. The other day I was browsing through some forums, reading about entitled drivers getting their comeuppance. It reminded me of this crazy situation I dealt with back when I was an EMT a few years ago. We got a call about a heavy-set patient named Frank who had taken a nasty fall at his place. Frank weighed around 450 pounds, but that's not really the point here. I'm not one to judge. People have their reasons for being larger, and my job was just to help however I could. No, the real issue was Frank's insufferable neighbor Mark, who was a world-class jerk. Frank had a disabled parking permit and a designated handicap spot right in front of his house, courtesy of the city. But this schmuck Mark constantly parked his cars in that spot, racking up fines and warning letters like they were baseball cards. He just didn't care how much hassle it caused Frank. So on this particular day, we roll up and sure enough, Mark's obnoxious BMW is sitting right in Frank's handicap zone. But it gets worse. He had also blocked the driveway with some rust bucket pickup truck. I check on Frank and it's obvious he broke his hip in the fall, meaning we needed to transport him ASAP. I send my partner Dave over to ask Mark to move the cars, but the guy basically tells him to get lost with some choicer words I won't repeat. That's when I knew we needed reinforcements. I radio dispatch to send engine and police support. The fire crew shows up first, and I explain the situation to the captain. He gets it immediately. One of his guys tries reasoning with Mark again, but surprise, surprise, the jerk won't budge. Then the captain looks at me and asks the million-dollar question, is the patient's life in danger here? He knew exactly what my answer meant. I tell him yes. With Mark's vehicles blocking the way, I can't get my equipment to Frank in time. That's all the captain needed to hear. He turns to his driver and simply says, "Move those cars." I'll never forget watching the firefighters effortlessly pushing and shoving those tons of metal out of the driveway like they were toys, while Mark comes storming out hollering a blue streak. The cops show up and try calming him down, but they know he's been a problem for ages. My assessment of the situation as life-threatening gave them all the justification they needed. Frank couldn't stop grinning from his window as we loaded him into the rig. Yeah, getting that hip fixed was gonna be rough, but giving his miserable neighbor a little payback, absolutely priceless. Sadly, Frank passed away a few months after that, but I'll always remember the smile on his face as we backed out of the driveway that day, leaving Mark to frantically try and sort out his cars from the mess on the street. A small victory, but one I was glad we could deliver for Frank before the end. The next one is an entitled people story. I've lived in my cozy little house for over 20 years now. It's nothing too fancy, just a simple 2-bedroom place with a small yard, but it's home. When I first moved in, I knew a few of my neighbors from around the block. There was Tom, the elderly widower who lived next door and was always happy to chat, and Maggie, the single mom across the street trying to raise her 3 rambunctious boys. We had a nice little community. That changed when the Wilsons moved in down the road. From the start, they rubbed people the wrong way. Mr. Wilson was an arrogant blowhard who loved to brag about his lucrative job as a real estate developer. Mrs. Wilson matched his attitude, parading around in designer clothes and fancy jewelry to show off their wealth. They acted like they owned the whole neighborhood. One day, I was doing some gardening in my backyard when I noticed Mr. Wilson sauntering over. He barely acknowledged me, just started scoping out my property. I asked if I could help him with something. "Oh, I'm just assessing the layout back here, planning some renovations to my home that could improve the value of the other houses around here as well," he declared smugly. Yeah, right, I thought, more like seeing if there was anything he could critique. Still, I tried to be polite and went back to my gardening. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing some odd rumblings under the ground when I was in my basement or backyard. At first, I figured it was some kind of underground construction work going on, but the vibrations were too regular, almost rhythmic. I decided to do some investigating. Pressing my ear to the ground, I could make out the distinct sound of digging underneath. I also noticed a few cracks starting to form in my basement foundation. As I examined the walls, the noise grew louder, and dust started trickling from the cracks. My mind flashed back to Mr. Wilson assessing my property earlier. Could he be tunneling under my house for some reason? I grabbed a flashlight and followed the sounds to a dirt mound in the back corner of my basement. Brushing away the soil, a hole just large enough to crawl through was revealed. Shining the light in, I could see a tunnel extending under my property. Cursing that arrogant jerk, I shimmied into the hole to follow the tunnel and see where it led. As I crawled forward, the tunnel opened up into a large, cavern-like space directly beneath my house. Wooden support beams were haphazardly installed, but they looked nowhere near sufficient to support my home above. Judging by the discarded energy bar wrappers and water bottles lying around, I wasn't the first visitor. In the center sat a humming generator, cords extending out from it. This must have been powering the loud digging noises. But why was Mr. Wilson secretly building a tunnel under my property? Just then, voices echoed from the way I had entered, followed by approaching flashlight beams. I ducked behind the generator just as Mr. Wilson himself emerged with an engineer beside him. As you can see, we just have some more supports to install before we start the next phase, Wilson explained to the engineer. My blood boiled. The engineer, however, looked skeptical. I still have concerns about the structural integrity, especially with the house above. Maybe we should inform the owner before proceeding. It'll be fine, Wilson dismissed. I'm not paying you to worry, just to keep working and keep quiet. The less the owner knows, the better. I couldn't listen to another word. Jumping out from my hiding place, I confronted them. Just what do you think you're doing tunneling under my home? I demanded furiously. Wilson's eyes went wide with shock before he regained his composure. Just some improvements to my own basement. This engineer is assessing the job. Cut the crap, I snapped. I heard everything. You've got 5 minutes to get out and start filling in this tunnel before I call the cops and every news outlet in town. The cocky smirk vanished from Wilson's face. Before he could argue, I turned to the engineer. I'd advise finding a different job site unless you want to be dragged into this mess. The engineer couldn't scramble back through the hole fast enough. Wilson tried to protest, but my steely glare shut him down. Soon the beam of his flashlight also receded down the tunnel. I wasted no time dialing up the police and several local reporters. Once they arrived, I led them through the tunnel, explaining the entire situation. The cunning scheme was exposed on the evening news and in the next day's paper. With evidence in hand, I sued Wilson for the damage to my property and reckless endangerment by compromising the structural integrity of my home. No amount of fancy lawyers could save his skin. The judge ultimately ruled completely in my favor, slapping Wilson with a massive fine and issuing a restraining order. Not only did I get a huge financial settlement, his reputation was left in ruins. The story even went national with the outrageous details of an entitled millionaire burrowing under his middle-class neighbor's home. Investors fled his real estate company. Last I heard, Wilson was drowning in lawsuits while desperately trying to salvage his business. He and his wife were forced to sell their designer mansion at a huge loss and slink away from our neighborhood in shame. The settlement money funded a complete renovation of my home, raising the property value, and thanks to shedding light on Wilson's shady dealings, I'm now something of a local neighborhood hero. Justice was served, and this working-class homeowner came out on top against the entitled rich guy's schemes. My block is peaceful again without the Wilsons lording over everyone, and I can rest easy knowing my house isn't at risk of collapsing into a tunnel dug by some arrogant jerk. Don't mess with this mama bear's den. The next one is a petty revenge story. A few weeks ago, I did some trimming on the large bushes and trees in my yard, cutting the branches that were hanging a bit low or a bit too far out from the landscaping. I ended up with 2 large yard waste bins full of branches, which I put out by the curb for pickup. The next day, when I came home from work, the city had picked up the yard waste for everyone else in my neighborhood, just not mine. I couldn't figure out why. The bins were full, but not overflowing, and they weren't overly heavy, as I was able to easily carry them out to the curb. The branches were between 3-4 feet long at the most, and I'd left similar bins out before, and they always got picked up without issue. I even checked online to see if I'd inadvertently violated any sort of restrictions, but didn't see anything that could explain it. I sort of wish the pickup people would have left a note telling me what the problem was. I was kind of annoyed, but not enough to call and complain about it, so I emptied out the bins in a discreet area to the side of my house. And for the past few weeks, every pickup day, whenever I wheel the regular garbage bin out to the curb, I've also been putting one of the yard waste bins out, with exactly 1 branch in it, and they have been taking it each time. Which means they have to stop the truck at my curb and someone has to get out, check the bin, see that the only thing in it is 1 branch, and then take the 1 branch. This is slowly, in tiny increments, creating more work for them than if they'd just emptied the 2 full bins to begin with. I intend to keep doing it until they acknowledge it, or I actually need the bins for yard work again, or until I get bored, which probably isn't going to happen. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I used to work at a hotel on a large property that did a lot of business conferences. We had golf buggies to get around, 10 different conference rooms, plus lots of other hotel facilities, storage rooms, etc. Upper management had a strict rule that important locks could only have 1 set of keys. Upper management also liked to save money by never fixing things when they broke. It must have looked good on paper. One week, we had a big spending client who had booked out the hotel for the week. Night one, our sales team had got the times wrong for their dinner of several hundred people, so all available staff were sent over 2 hours early to start setting up. The hotel's general manager, GM, announced he would be over shortly to see how things were going, which was almost unheard of for him. What he found was about 20 staff standing around outside the venue. The conversation went something like this. GM: "Why is everyone standing around?" Supervisor: "Soup, we don't have the keys." We sent a staff member looking for the other supervisor who has the keys now. GM: "Where are your other sets of keys?" Sup: "We've only been given the one set of keys." GM: "Why don't the staff have a radio on them?" Sup: "Radios have been broken for over a year and never approved to be replaced." GM: "Why did you only send one staff member to look for them?" Sup: "We only have the one working golf buggy." GM grumbles and sends another staff member off on his buggy to look for the keys. Eventually, after everyone standing around for nearly 20 minutes, the keys turned up. The GM was stressed out of his mind that such a big client might be kept waiting. For the supervisor, it was just another Monday. Malicious compliance. The supervisor had access to a backup set of keys that they were strictly forbidden from using. Usually in a situation like this, they would quietly use the forbidden keys and everything would go smoothly. But because the GM decided to be there, they didn't mention the forbidden keys, causing delays and panicking management. Fallout. The next week, each supervisor got their own set of keys. A few weeks later, we got radios for the department. Upper management also started checking in on how things were going from time to time. Apparently, making rules without knowing how things actually work isn't such a good policy. The next one is an entitled people story. Last year in May, we all got into an argument over our dog chewing on a table that was given to us by my in-laws. That spiraled into, we don't do anything right, and blah blah blah. I made the comment to them that they never care about my feelings and gave examples. One being Christmas of 2022, I wanted it to be just my husband, myself, and our daughter. My husband was deployed the year before, so it would have been our first Christmas together as a family of 3, and my dad had just died, and mother-in-law made it out to everyone that they weren't welcome just because they couldn't be here on Christmas Day because they live 7 hours away. And I wanted it to be just the 3 of us, and they stayed a whole week before Christmas, but it wasn't on Christmas Day, so to her she wasn't welcome. Mill yelled at me. My son was gone for a year, and my dad died. Her dad passed away in 2019. I quietly responded, "My dad died too," and she yelled back, "Yeah, but mine was my life." And for a year, I was told I took that the wrong way. Fast forward to this year in April, they came down because my file mom was not doing good. We all got into another big fight for not wanting our 2-year-old to sleep in a hotel bed with them. Memil called my husband for days bashing me, saying, "I know in OP heart of hearts she never wanted us to have a relationship with grandchild. When OP has another baby, she'll keep that one from us." Telling my husband I was the reason he never went to see his grandma in the nursing home, telling him how inconsiderate I was for not telling FIL that I was sorry for his loss. The first day that I actually got to see them and spend time with them was the day after my father-in-law's mom passed away. I didn't know how to go up to him, and we were out most of the day, and I didn't want to upset him in public and talk about it because nobody was bringing it up. I made them cookies to try to lighten up the mood. I bought him an angel, and that was my way of saying I was sorry for what he was going through. As soon as they walked into our house, they were upset that there was puppy pee on the floor and that there were dishes in the sink, and they didn't feel welcome apparently, so they wanted to go to a hotel, and they wanted to bring our 2-year-old daughter, and we said no, and that's where the fighting began. And as soon as they got back home, 7-hour drive, that's when she kept calling my husband to bash me. As for it being my fault, supposedly, that my husband never went to see his grandma, I always went with him when he asked me to. It was hard for him because she had dementia, and she would always beg for him to get her out of there, so to place the blame on me was so uncalled for. One of the last times she called to bash me, my husband was trying to defend me on what she said a year ago about my dad. She then said, "I was just explaining why I needed Christmas with my son and his daughter." When my husband tried to defend me on that comment, she said, "Well, I actually had a relationship with mine, in a snarky way that did it for me. I was tired of the gaslighting. I was tired of her making up lies and excuses, bashing me over a disagreement with my daughter and disrespecting me and my feelings about losing my dad. She's always the victim, and I don't want to fuel that by allowing her to be around my daughter after how she's treated not only me but my husband too, and he still does not talk to her either. She still has yet to apologize. She's still making excuses and blaming me for all these things, which, by the way, had nothing to do with what we got in a fight about in the first place. And she's always changing up why she's hurt by what we did to her and can never give us a real reason on how it's our fault. She's just trying to play victim and I can't stand it. As for husband and his dad, they have made up, and actually his dad is divorcing his mom and wanting to move down here, so that's another reason why I don't know if she should be allowed at my daughter's party in August. I only get 1/3 birthday with my daughter and I don't want any drama. What should I do or say to her if she asks my husband to be invited? The next one is an entitled parent story. My mom abruptly left my dad when I was a toddler because he was verbally, financially, and slowly becoming physically abusive. One day after he went to work, she packed us up and left him. Growing up, she never spoke badly about him and always encouraged us to talk and see each other. My first memory of my father is from when I was 5. He picked me up and we drove to his friend's house to go fishing. I only spoke Spanish at the time and all his friends were very American. After a couple of hours, he told me to stay with them because he was going to run errands and be back in an hour. While he was gone, I was really scared and confused because I didn't know him, didn't know the people he left me with, and couldn't communicate with them. I tried asking the lady to let me call my mom, but she didn't understand me. When he finally picked me up, it was super late and all I had eaten was some corn pops with no milk. We went to his apartment and all he had was a mattress on the floor with a big window in front of it, no shades. I didn't sleep at all. I was hungry. That was the first time I ever saw a sunrise. After that, I was always scared of being alone with him. I would always bring a friend or cousin. I'd only see him maybe once a year on my birthday, and honestly don't remember much, if anything, about those times. He was mostly absent from my life. When I was 11, we moved to the same city as my aunt, father's sister, who my mom is very close to. I started learning about all the crazy issues my dad's side of the family had. My father came and visited me and his sister and even thought of moving there too. But first, he tried talking to my mom and I guess gauging to see if she was still interested in him. She wasn't. I didn't know this ATM. This was when things became bad. My dad started causing problems with my aunt and his mother for being in contact with my mom. He started hating my mom a lot and it affected our relationship even more. He told my grandmother that she was not allowed to be around us. One day I went to the mall with my mom, grandmother, aunt, and my cousins and we had a great time. At the end, my grandma gave me $1,000 cash and a letter. The letter said she could no longer be my grandma and she couldn't be in my life. I was 12. My heart was broken because I loved her. My aunt took my mom's side and stopped talking to my dad and grandma. He was absent after that. When I was 15, I was going through a rebellious phase with my mom. I grew up a lonely, only child, latchkey kid, and I was extremely confused about all the issues with my dad. I wanted to learn for myself why my dad hated my mom. At this time, I didn't know my dad had been abusive. I begged him to let me visit him and meet my little brothers, although I was scared. He took me on vacation to Canada with his wife, kids, and my grandmother. It was awkward, but mostly okay until he decided to speak ill of my entire mom's side of the family. He blamed my mom for his problems and called her an idiot. He just said horrible things. I realized he was a monster. When I got back, I begged my mom to tell me the truth. I learned about the abuse she endured, his childhood, and the abuse he, my aunt, and grandma had endured. All the drama I didn't understand from over the years, everything. Basically, my grandfather was extremely abusive, and my dad's family was consistently getting into fights and had a love-hate relationship with one another. I was shocked to say the least. Still, I tried to be understanding and to have a relationship with my dad, but he was never interested. He'd tell me he would call and never did. He forgot my birthdays, never congratulated me on anything, was just totally absent. I tried visiting him again, but he left me all day at his business alone. He just didn't seem to care about me. Now, years later, he calls me out of the blue. He tells me without apologizing that the reason he's been absent from my life is because he has depression. That he finally has his medication in order, and to please understand that he couldn't even bear to look at me my whole life. That I remind him of my mom and the day she left him. That I remind him of his failures. He calls and texts me often now, but still to this day he doesn't ask about me. He doesn't know anything about me at all. Nothing. He talks about himself, his business, his vacations, his kids. I answer because I feel bad for him, but it hurts so much, and it's hard for me to even think of him. It hurts that when he sees me, he sees his failures. He doesn't see me. I don't think he ever will, and IDK how to get over that. The next story is titled, Idiot Father Costs His Kid $100 or as much as $500 for Being a Moron. If you've read my previous posts, you'll know I usually have issues with the mother folks. This time, I'll give you in all the glory the biggest fool I ever had to deal with in my business of owning a comic store and selling from flea markets. The year was 1995 or 1996. Two kids, about 12 or 13, walked into my store and wanted to buy a pack of Upper Deck SPX basketball. For those of you who do not know, there was one card per pack, and it was a hologram card except for some inserts. The kid paid $5, and he selected a pack and opened it. It didn't look like a regular card, and we were confused about what it may be. I asked to see it and saw that it was an Anthony Hardaway rookie autograph redemption card. To get it, you had to mail this into Upper Deck, and they sent you an autographed card. The kid asked what the value was, and I pulled out my Beckett's price guide and looked it up. No online sites then. According to the guide, it had a value of $500. Needless to say, this kid was jumping up and down with joy, and his friend was excited too. Enter Idiot Father. Idiot Father saw his happy kid and looked annoyed. He asked what was going on. The kid told him he got a $500 card. I confirmed this, and he asked how much he paid for the pack. When the kid told him, he got mad that he wasted $5 on a goddamn pack of cards. I told the kid what had to be done to get the card, and Father was upset that he had to mail something. His reasoning was that they would know where he lived. I told him that this was normal, and it was just to send his son the card. Nope, not having it. I said to him, tell you what, I'll mail it for you and your address will not be known by Upper Deck. I'll give you a receipt and I'll give you a call when it comes in. He didn't want to do that because I'd have his number. I said, sir, I don't want to hang with you. All I want is for your son to get his card. I then said that I'll give you the receipt for the card and you can come in and pick it up in about 30 days as I would mail it out tomorrow. Nope. I would just tell him that I never got it and sell it and rip him off. I said, okay. How about I give you $100 for it right now and you don't have to do anything? Nope, it was worth $500 and I was ripping him off. He then told the kid that he wasn't smart enough to buy anything because he was being robbed and was an idiot for not realizing it. I tried one last time. I showed him the expiration date, which was in about 2 months, and said that since he had no interest in mailing it in or selling it, he would not be getting anything for it as it would become worthless after that date. Well, he dragged the kid out while insulting the kid and myself, leaving his friend behind to fend for himself. Several months go by, and I never heard if the kid got the card or not. One day I decided to go to the supermarket in the strip mall I was located in and saw the kid with his mother. I asked him if he ever got the card, and he said no. His mother asked, what card? And the kid said nothing. She asked again, and he muttered that he got a good card, and his father wouldn't let him send away for it. He told her what it was worth, and that I offered to buy it, and she got pissed. A few seconds later, here comes Idiot Father, and he sees me talking to them. She asks him about the card, and he started stammering that I was trying to rip them off and tried to get their address, and that the whole thing was a scam. The look in her eyes could melt the polar caps. She said, I work 3 jobs, and you sit on your ass all day and you turn down an easy $100 because you're so effing paranoid that you refuse to believe anything. She asked her son what happened to the card, and the kid told her that the moron ripped it up and threw it out the window of the car. She turns to him and tells him he's walking home because she didn't want to be in the same car with him. Found out it was a 7-mile walk. It was December. I don't know what happened after that, as the kid's friend told me they moved soon after. In my opinion, this story is a great example of how an adult's actions can have negative consequences for a child. It's sad to think that the kid missed out on a potentially valuable card because of his father's paranoia and refusal to follow through with a simple process. It's also heartening to see the mother standing up for her child and taking action against the father's behavior. Overall, it's an interesting and thought-provoking story about the importance of following through on opportunities and not letting fear or mistrust get in the way. The next story is titled, Criminal Karen Tows Unmarked Police Car After They Block Her Property. As a resident of a rural area in the Czech Republic, I had always been accustomed to the peace and quiet that came with living in such an area. However, my peaceful existence was disrupted when a couple, whom I will refer to as Karen and her boyfriend, moved in next door. They were the complete opposite of what one would expect from someone living in the countryside, and it wasn't long before I realized they were up to no good. Karen and her boyfriend were notorious for their loud music, constant screaming, and general disregard for the appearance of their property. It was a total mess, and it wasn't long before it started to attract all sorts of animals. The smell that emanated from their yard was simply unbearable, and I had to keep my windows shut at all times to avoid the stench. I had always tried to keep to myself and avoid confrontations with my neighbors, but Karen made it almost impossible. She had a bad attitude and would always try to start fights with me for no reason. I tried to talk to her on several occasions, but it always ended with her threatening me or throwing garbage at me. One day, as I was returning home from a walk, I noticed several people entering Karen's house, and I realized they were there to buy drugs. I knew it was time to do something about it, but I was hesitant because I knew that Karen and her boyfriend were dangerous. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and I decided to call the police. I informed them that my neighbors were cooking and selling meth, and they promised to send someone over as soon as possible. It was a rural area, so it took a while before the police showed up. When the police finally arrived, they parked their unmarked car in front of Karen's house, and that's when things started to get ugly. Karen flew into a rage and threatened to tow the police car because it was blocking her property. She called a tow truck, and when it arrived, the police officers rushed out to stop the driver from towing the car away. The driver argued that he had been called to tow an illegal vehicle, but the police officers quickly showed him their badges and informed him that the car was parked legally. They warned him that if he didn't put the car down immediately, they would arrest him for obstructing a police investigation. Karen continued to rant and rave, and it was clear that she was high on drugs. The police arrested her, and when they entered the house, they discovered a meth cooking operation, illegal weapons, and a ton of drugs. Her boyfriend was also arrested, and it was discovered that he had been on probation for a previous arrest. In the end, Karen and her boyfriend were charged with multiple drug-related offenses and tax fraud. The property owner, who was not Karen, sued them for damages and the cost of cleaning up the property. It was a relief to have them gone, but it was also a sobering reminder that danger could be lurking in even the most peaceful of places. Update. In the years that followed, the community came together to try to prevent anything like this from happening again. The police increased their patrols in the area, and the residents became more vigilant about reporting any suspicious activity. I heard that Karen and her boyfriend were sentenced to a lengthy prison term and would be behind bars for a long time. I also heard that the property was sold to a family who had plans to turn it into a community garden, which was a positive step towards healing and creating a safer environment for all. In my opinion, this story highlights the importance of being aware of one's surroundings and being willing to take action when necessary. It's alarming to think that dangerous criminal activity could be happening right next door without anyone knowing about it. The bravery of the protagonist in reporting Karen and her boyfriend's drug operation to the police is admirable. It's also satisfying to see justice served and the community coming together to prevent anything like this from happening again. Overall, it's a gripping and eye-opening story that serves as a reminder to always stay vigilant. The next story is titled, Neighbors Think My Life Now Revolves Around Them. So, on today's episode of What the Duck from the Neighbors, I need to have them approve when I do things that make any sort of noise. My neighbor just rang my doorbell to tell me his wife said to stop hammering. I was dumbfounded. I just kinda stared and said, "Excuse me?" And he informed me that we would be unable to make any sort of noise for the next few months because of their baby. To which I laughed in his face and closed the door. And now his wife is screaming at my door and he is messaging me to please just do what his wife says. So, some background. My spouse bought this house in 2011. Both houses are single-family detached homes. Both lots are 1.5 lots, so there is 33 feet roughly between our houses compared to the 6 feet for the rest of the street. The neighbor's husband was already in his house. I moved in 8 years ago, shortly after I saw the neighbor for the first time, and it was someone I've known since I was 4. We went to school all the way through high school together. We are 40. 3 years ago, he met someone. She had, at the time, a 2-year-old girl. She would stay at his house, and I would constantly find the kid wandering the streets. They would just send her outside with no supervision, no toys, no fenced yard, and expect her to entertain herself. The child was, and still is, nothing but a brat. 2 years ago, she moved in with her daughter. I run a daycare, so my yard is full of fun toys. But we also have 3 other fenced-off areas, one for our pool in the summer, one for our dogs, and one for our hot tub. All have separate fences and self-closing gates, plus my external fence is 650. During 2020, when COVID hit bad, the kids were doing virtual schooling from home. She never actually did it. She would be ringing my doorbell in the middle of the day, asking me to open my yard for her. I would explain that she can't be here when I have daycare kids and my daughter will come out to play after supper. She went to their backyard, dragged patio furniture to my fence, and climbed in. Who knows how long she was actually in there. But she decided she was done, and then couldn't get out. The latch for my main gate is at the very top, so the babies can't open it when my back is turned. She started screaming. I ran out in a panic, took her home, explained what happened to Mom, and Mom gave me crap for just not allowing her to play. I face a $100K fine if she is caught on my property during daycare hours. I explained this. She still snapped and called me an idiot. I left it at that. Happened a handful more times. I started sending them daycare invoices. Still kept happening. I finally told them I would have to call the police next time, which I did. Except this time, Mom and Grandpa were both sitting outside on the stairs and watched her do it. Also, they never bothered to come help her open the gate when she started screaming. Police gave them crap and told them to stop, or Mom would be charged with child endangering. I now have proximity sensors at the top of my fence and get a notification if anything goes over my fence. It's gotten better as she has gotten older, so last summer we set up our above-ground pool. We just ordered a new pump system and heater. The pool was half filled. I had also just done up all my planters. I casually glanced at my security cameras and saw her by the pool. I headed out. The main gate was open as the neighborhood kids were running from yard to yard playing. She took it upon herself to go to the pool and take buckets of soil from my planters and dump it into the pool. There was $400 damage to my brand new $1,000 pump heater system that was up for less than 4 hours. I snapped and screamed at her to get out of my yard and not come back. She is not allowed in my yard at all unless me or my spouse is out there. Now to current time. They had a new baby last week, and me hammering in my basement is disturbing them in their house 33 away, and they expect me to wait until the fall to finish my project. So I'm currently sitting on my bench outside, enjoying a glass of water with my outdoor speakers playing metal while I mow the lawn, which is much louder than the little bit of hammering. I'll finish that tonight after dark. In my opinion, this story is a perfect example of why it's important to have good communication with your neighbors. It's unfortunate that the writer has to deal with such difficult neighbors who don't seem to understand boundaries, but it's clear that there were misunderstandings on both sides. I can see how frustrating it must be to have to constantly deal with someone else's child wandering into your yard, especially when it could potentially put you in legal trouble. At the same time, it's understandable that the neighbors would be sensitive to noise with a newborn in the house. It's a tough situation, but hopefully they can come to some kind of understanding and find a way to coexist peacefully. The next story is titled, I left a landlord and property management company at a loss because they tried to nickel and dime me. I know the title is bad, but hear me out. This happened a while ago after I relocated to a new city. I signed a new 1-year lease for a townhouse in the downtown core and really enjoyed where I lived. The townhouse was okay, but a little less nice than I anticipated during my showing. Caveat emptor, I suppose. The only other relevant background is that the lease said the security deposit would be used for the last month's rent and would not be held as a damage deposit. The year passed with very few problems. The water heater went out in the dead of winter, but I stayed in a hotel for 3 nights and offset that cost against the rent after verbally agreeing with the landlord to do so. At the end of the year, the landlord asked if I wanted to renew. I said yes. I was presented with a 1-year extension for the same rent. I signed it and sent it back. I waited about 2 weeks and hadn't received the landlord's signed version back, so I inquired with the management company. They said the landlord was mad because they didn't get rent on the first of the month most of the time. I asked what they were talking about because I always paid on or ahead of time, and they said that while I paid the management company on time, as required by the lease, the management company hadn't gotten it into the landlord's hands in time. I said that wasn't my problem per the lease, but the management company requested $100 more per month on the extension to make up for the inconvenience. They said they would send me a new lease reflecting the $100 increase, which they did. I immediately went out and found a condo in a similarly ideal location that was much nicer and rented for $75 a month less than my existing rent. I went through the background check with them and they sent me a lease to sign. Before signing the new lease, I sent a certified letter to the landlord and the management company of the old location saying my previous signature on the new lease, which had not yet been countersigned, was revoked and ineffective because of their counteroffer and no longer capable of acceptance. I then signed the new lease. At that point, I had about 10 days left on the existing lease. The management company and landlord called me freaking out because they wouldn't be able to find a new tenant in time and would lose revenue. I said, not my problem, hired a moving company, cleaned up the old place, and returned it to them in the same condition I received it. In my opinion, the story highlights the importance of carefully reading and understanding the terms of a lease agreement. It's frustrating to be nickel and dimed by a landlord or property management company, but it's equally important to stand up for one's rights as a tenant. The protagonist's decision to revoke their previous signature on the new lease and find a better deal elsewhere shows that sometimes it's necessary to take matters into one's own hands. However, leaving the old place in good condition and not causing unnecessary harm to the landlord or management company is also commendable. Overall, this story provides valuable lessons for anyone who is renting or looking to rent a property. The last story is titled, "A Man Misunderstood a Flight Attendant's Directions and Felt Entitled to a Free Premium Seat Because They Wouldn't Apologize for Lying to Him." This happened last night, and it was one of the most satisfying encounters I've ever had with someone who had a downright comical sense of entitlement. I took a flight from San Francisco to Boston that was in the afternoon after a full day of work. I had a $200 airline credit to use on just this one flight before I lost it at the end of the year, so I was debating between trying to drink through $200 of free booze over the 6-hour flight or upgrading my seat to the front row. In the end, I decided to go with the seat upgrade and picked the window seat in the absolute front row of the plane with a shameful amount of legroom and an empty middle seat. I never get upgrades, so this felt like quite the luxury to me. Turns out the rest of the plane was completely full, so I was feeling pretty good about this decision. However, I still had some work to do on my laptop and was disappointed that because there were no seats in front, I could not keep my backpack in front of me, and I realized I had to go fight the mob of people still boarding for some overhead bin space before they all filled up. There was a very nice businessman sitting in the aisle seat in my row who stood up to help me. This is relevant later. The overhead bins filled very quickly, at which point the flight attendant at the plane door started announcing, "Overhead bins are almost full, put your bags in the first one you see," to all the people still boarding the plane. Now here comes the last man to board the plane. He's probably about 6'3", and he runs in and kind of shoots the crap with one of the flight attendants for a few minutes, and I'm not paying too much attention besides hoping he's not going to take the middle seat and the fact that he is talking very loudly, and he seems to be a bit drunk. For the rest of the story, I will call this man Dirk, because I don't know what the male version of Karen is. Nobody is in any rush to start getting ready for takeoff, and we soon know why. The pilot gets on the loudspeaker and says that because of the weather in Boston, we need to wait here before we can take off. Now Dirk has stopped talking to the flight attendant and starts to walk down the aisle, sees our empty middle seat, and announces, "Cool, I'll take this first seat because it's empty." Throws his backpack down in the space in front of us and slams himself into the middle seat. Now, of course, I wouldn't have minded if someone had purchased the middle seat, but now I'm grumbling a bit internally thinking about how I spent my airline credit on this upgrade instead of booze while this guy is going to get the nice seat for free. And nobody immediately came up to him and asked him to move his backpack, so I'm also frustrated that I had to go put mine away and now his bag is in front of my feet. And finally, Dirk is being extremely loud and vocal. For example, when the pilot came on the loudspeaker again and said we would be waiting 45 minutes before takeoff, Dirk yelled out, "Man, this is some bullcrap!" Stuff like that over and over. So at this point, I haven't said anything to him, but I'm sitting there probably looking like this. It's been about 5 minutes already, not too long, but I'm starting to think they're just going to let this fly. Then comes one of the flight attendants and walks up to this guy and says, "Sir, can I please see your boarding pass?" The man laughs a bit and says he just showed it at the gate, and the flight attendant repeats that he would like to see it. So the man starts rummaging through his backpack and hands the attendant some crumpled up paper and then goes back to his phone. The flight attendant uncrumples it and now starts to look annoyed and goes, "Sir, you just handed me a receipt. Try again." The man starts belly laughing like, "Oh, my bad," and then pulls his boarding pass from his pocket. Of course, he is in 32B, and the flight attendant asks him to go to his assigned seat. Now they start to fight, with Dirk saying, "But the guy said to take the first available seat. Nobody is sitting here anyway." And the attendant repeating that he didn't know how he heard that, but people need to pay to upgrade to these seats, and he needs to go to his assigned seat now. Things started to get heated, and Dirk is full-on screaming now, saying, "Why did he say to take the first available seat then? Why was he lying?" The attendant is yelling back, "This isn't Southwest!" And the rest of the plane is silent and watching. Now at this point, I'm guessing Dirk misinterpreted the guy at the door, saying to throw your bags in the first available overhead bin, but I did not want to get involved and have this potentially drunk man next to me direct his anger at me. Edit. The flight attendant announcing this was being very clear about this being for bags as well, so I think Dirk was just making up excuses. At this point, there are 3 flight attendants in the aisle arguing with Dirk, who is still scream-repeating the same thing about being lied to over and over. They are saying he needs to move or get kicked off the plane, and Dirk is replying that of course he would rather make it home to Boston tonight than get kicked off, but he needs an explanation first as to why they lied to him. In comes a boss of a lady who wasn't taking any of Dirk's crap to join the argument. She interrupts Dirk and says, "Look, you have 2 options. Take your assigned seat or get off the plane. I don't care what you think you heard. I don't know why we are still having this conversation." Then, when Dirk would open his mouth to continue arguing, the lady would hold up her hand and yell, "Ah, ah, ah," like a mother silencing their toddler having a tantrum, and I am sitting there 6 inches away from the action watching this all go down like this. Dirk sits there in silence for a few moments, mouth open, looking at this lady, and then stays sitting in the seat and looks back at his phone and starts mumbling again in a low voice about being lied to. At this point, the 3 flight attendants walk away, and Dirk seems to think that he's won, but lo and behold, 1 minute later, security comes on the plane. Now seeing this, Dirk stands straight up and says, "Okay, I will go take my seat," and starts to walk down the aisle, but they stop him and remove him from the plane, and we didn't see him again. And me and the nice man sitting in the aisle seat ended up getting free drinks for the rest of the flight for our troubles. In my opinion, this story is both entertaining and frustrating at the same time. It's interesting to see how entitled some people can be, and it's satisfying to see that the airline staff didn't back down and let the passenger have his way. However, it's also frustrating to see how some people feel like they deserve things that they haven't paid for and then throw a tantrum when they don't get their way. Overall, it's a good reminder to always follow the rules and treat others with respect, especially when traveling. The next story is titled, "My parents and Dan came back sooner than I thought, and they wanted money this time." This won't surprise some people who commented on my previous posts, as my parents did some of the exact things they said they would, such as wanting either my money or my signature. I did expect the classic lines of narcissists saying that I owed them, or giving me some kind of socialist BS about sharing the wealth, but that was just my imagination running wild. The ensuing situation was somewhat similar to that, but much tamer, I guess you could say. They seemed to know not to push me too far now, and were mostly aiming for pity. It began when my parents recently got in touch with me through social media, and asked for a meeting in a public place of my choosing. It just screamed trap, but I wasn't afraid. In fact, I was amused. They know I'm not to be messed with anymore, so I could only wonder what they wanted this time. I picked a local restaurant that may have a name with an olive and a garden in it, and we met up there. Dan was with them, but he kept his mouth shut most of the time. We had awkward greetings, ordered some drinks, and then cut to the chase. My parents begged me to help Dan get his own apartment so he could finally move out. Apparently, Dan's credit isn't so great. Gee, I wonder why. Could it be that his wife regularly spends him into a hole? Well, they asked that I help by either supplying some capital or co-signing for the apartment and helping to pay the rent for it. I simply said no to both. That's when Dan spoke up in anger and yelled at me that I have so much, and I don't have a family to support like he does. He needed my help, and I should be sparing the money for his family since I don't have one myself. I laughed and asked where they were when I needed their help. Oh, that's right. They were pointing and laughing at me for being homeless. Or should we go further back to my childhood? I'd love to delve into that with plenty of ears to listen in around us. My mother grabbed my hand and begged me not to speak of any of it. My father and Dan both just looked away and said nothing. I'm pretty sure they wanted to say something like they used to say to me, but held their tongues. I asked them if they thought I was rich or something, and their looks said it all. And when I told them I don't have that kind of money, they looked at me like deer in headlights. I broke it down about how much I'd managed to save for the down payment on my house and the way I had to live and work to save that much so fast. And then how I spent nearly all of it on the down payment of my house. I'm still in financial recovery. I did have monthly income to spare, yes, but most of it was going right into my savings. I asked Dan what his yearly salary was, and when he told me, I pointed out that it was actually a bit higher than mine. I then loosely broke things down in rough math in front of my parents about how about 70% of my income goes to my mortgage, insurance, gasoline, internet, phone, food, and other bills. And then there's maybe 30% of that left at most that I can put into savings. And I need that money saved to get back on my feet in time. And I have to make sure I have savings to fall back on. My truck is from the 90s. If it were to break down, I'd need money to either fix or replace it. And there are other things one would need a rainy day fund for, like home repairs, doctors, taxes, lawyers, or anything in general you'd need quick cash for when it's a sudden unexpected expense. So as you can see, I just can't spare money for Dan. And I also refuse to co-sign for anything, as that would leave me on the hook for any bill Dan couldn't or wouldn't pay. Then I pointed out that's likely why my parents didn't co-sign for Dan's apartment themselves long ago, and my mother just started crying again. I was pretty much one step ahead of them in all of this. I'm not an ATM, and I'm not a fool, and I stated that right to their faces. I expected my father to become angry with me like he always does, but this time he just, well, didn't. I've known this man to explode on me for the slightest provocation of not enabling my brother all of my life, but this time he just didn't do that. There wasn't even a sneer on his face. The only way I could describe the look he had was regret and defeat. Maybe regret for being a crappy parent, or maybe regret because he can't bully me around anymore. Who knows? Either way, my parents couldn't really argue with me, and I wasn't about to give them any money. Dan just got up and said this was all just a waste of their time and that he was leaving. My mother just excused his behavior, and we all parted ways. That was about it. Not nearly as much drama as I thought there'd be, but this is still far better than how things used to be with my parents and brother. As for sister-in-law, well, she's been regularly complaining online about my parents. She really doesn't seem to like the fact that she's not the queen bee of their house, and I think her toxicity is finally getting to them. Why else would they be so desperate to come crawling back to me? Sister-in-law actually wants my parents to move into a camper like I had to do to make space in the house, and she's being told no every time. She does seem to have a following of Karen-minded people like her, though, because here and there I get messaged by someone I don't know that are intent on raging at me for not giving up my house for sister-in-law. I don't bother to argue with these people anymore. I just block and move on. Though there was one persistent troll who had my phone number, and they call from a different number every time. Yes, it seems to be the same person who called me to say I need to make way for a real family man like Dan, but I couldn't care less. The calls, though, seem to have slowed down, if not maybe stopped, because I made it clear to that person that they were only amusing me by keeping this up so long. The last time they called was around the beginning of the month, and it's been silence from them since then. The next story is titled HOA Trespassed and Broke into My Home with Bolt Cutters and Destroyed My Tree. I sued them for $285,000. Living in an HOA neighborhood was never something I thought I would have to deal with. My grandparents had lived in one before, and their horror stories about the endless rules and ridiculous fines made my parents swear off ever living in one again. However, after my grandparents passed away, I inherited their house and decided to move in. I didn't want to sell it to a stranger who wouldn't appreciate it as much as my grandparents had, so I figured I would live in it until I could rent it out to another family member or someone who was close to me. Little did I know, my decision would lead to one of the most stressful and infuriating experiences of my life. The first few days in the house were relatively peaceful until I received a knock on the door. It was the HOA board members, and right off the bat, they were rude and nosy. They demanded that I sign their papers, but after looking through their ridiculous rules, I refused to do so. I thought I was in the clear until I received fines in the mail. They were demanding that I pay these fines, even though I never signed their papers. I refused to pay. And that's when things took a turn for the worse. One day I came home from work to find the HOA board members in my yard, along with professional landscapers. They had broken into my yard with bolt cutters and were in the process of taking down a tree that my grandmother had planted with my grandfather over 50 years ago. I was absolutely livid. They had no right to be on my property, let alone destroy something that held so much sentimental value. I immediately called the police and contacted a lawyer. The HOA board members tried to fight the charges, but it was clear that they had broken the law. I ended up suing them for emotional distress and was awarded $285,000 in damages. It was a small victory, but it felt good to stand up for myself and my grandparents. However, my battle with the HOA was far from over. The more I researched the organization, the more I realized how corrupt it truly was. It wasn't just about the fines and the ridiculous rules. It was about the board members abusing their power and using the organization as a means to make money. I decided to take matters into my own hands and started attending HOA meetings. I wanted to see firsthand what was going on and to make my voice heard. I quickly realized that the board members were a tight-knit group who didn't take kindly to outsiders. They made it clear that they didn't want me there, but I refused to back down. Over time, I started to gain support from other members who were fed up with the HOA's corrupt ways. We formed a coalition and started to dig deeper into the organization's finances. What we found was shocking. The board members had been embezzling money for years, using the HOA's funds to pay for their own personal expenses. We presented our findings to the authorities, and the board members were arrested and charged with fraud. Justice had been served, and the HOA was disbanded. It was a bittersweet victory, but I was proud to have played a part in bringing down an organization that had caused so much stress and frustration for so many people. In the end, I decided to keep my grandparents' house and make it my own. It was a constant reminder of the battle I had fought and the victory I had won. I turned it into a sanctuary, a place where I could escape the stresses of the outside world. And as for the HOA, it was nothing more than a distant memory. A cautionary tale of power gone wrong and the importance of standing up for what you believe in. But my story doesn't end there. A few months after the HOA was disbanded, I received a call from a man named Jack. He introduced himself as a former member of the HOA board and said he had something important to tell me. We met up at a local coffee shop, and Jack told me that he had been working with the FBI to bring down the corrupt members of the HOA board. He said that my involvement in the coalition had caught their attention, and they wanted to thank me for my help. Jack gave me a folder filled with documents that outlined the FBI's investigation. They had been watching the HOA for years, trying to gather enough evidence to take down the corrupt board members. Jack said that my involvement had been the final piece of the puzzle. I was stunned. I had no idea that my actions had played such a significant role in the FBI's investigation. Jack thanked me for my help and said that he had one more thing to show me. He pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to me. It was a letter from the FBI director, thanking me for my help in taking down the corrupt members of the HOA board. The letter also said that I was being awarded a Medal of Honor for my bravery and dedication to justice. I couldn't believe it. I had never considered myself a hero, but to be recognized by the FBI was an incredible honor. I thanked Jack and the FBI for their work, and I left the coffee shop feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. Today, I still live in my grandparents' house, and it's become a symbol of the battle I fought and the victory I won. I'm grateful for the experience because it taught me the importance of standing up for what I believe in and the power of collective action. The HOA may have caused me a lot of stress and frustration, but it also gave me a sense of purpose and a platform to make a difference. The next story is titled Entitled Parker, Parked in My Driveway, so I blocked them in and got drunk all weekend. On Friday night after work, I returned home only to find that someone in our neighborhood was having a big party, and somebody decided to park in my driveway, thinking they were entitled to do so. My driveway is a single car width, lined on both sides with a retaining wall, and with a garage at the end. It is impossible for a tow truck to pull the car out without causing damage. Since there was a lack of street parking, I decided to park my car right behind theirs in my driveway. A few hours went by, and then the entitled parker came to my door, demanding that I move my car so that they could leave. I informed them that I had been drinking and would not move my car. They persisted, and so I simply reiterated my position. The entitled parker then decided to call the police to force me to move. When the police arrived, I made sure to grab a beer from the fridge before I answered the door to talk to the officer. I informed the officer that I had been drinking, was in no shape to drive, and would not move my car. The police were stuck. They couldn't tow the entitled parker's car out. I was in no condition to drive, and I was legally parked in my driveway. In the end, I told the entitled parker that I would be on a weekend-long bender, and that they could come and move my car after I went to work on Tuesday. The next story is titled Babysitting Means Paying the Kids' Dental Bills. Years ago, I used to babysit my neighbor's 9-10-year-old daughter. He was a divorced father with the kind of ex that would send spreadsheets of child-rearing expenses calculated to the penny and weekly invoices complete with terms and penalties of her own choosing for late payments. He paid big child support and generally paid her invoices on time because she would cut off access to the kiddo if he didn't. His ex, the snake, and I had basic text messaging contact. She and I had a previous dust-up because a sudden weather change necessitated a jacket for the kiddo. We popped into the nearest discount store and I let her pick a jacket. Kiddo loved it, but her mother threw a giant fit at me because it wasn't brand name. I blew it off and the neighbor and I laughed about it when he reimbursed me. She gave me the silent treatment. Time moved forward. Father always reimbursed kiddos' expenses and encouraged fun and healthy activities. One day he called me and apologized that he was getting held up at work, and kiddo had an orthodontist appointment. He asked me to take her. I agreed, and he called the dentist to authorize. We got there, and they wouldn't see her without a payment of $225. It was necessary. Kiddo's braces were hurting her. Dad wasn't available, but I knew he would reimburse me, so I put it on my credit card rather than call her snake of a mother. Kiddo got patched up, Dad reimbursed me, I paid the card and didn't use it. A few months later, I got a past due call from my card company. Repeat charges from the orthodontist. I let Dad know and called the orthodontist, who told me I signed an automatic payment agreement. I gave my "heck no, I'm just the babysitter" speech and didn't get far with them, so I canceled the card. Dad apologized profusely and reimbursed me. A month later, I got a nasty call from the orthodontist about my card declining. I kindly informed them I'm not the parent and provided the snake's phone number. About an hour later, the snake was furiously calling and texting me. I silenced my phone and looked later. She maxed out my voicemail, and all of her text messages were about how I was abusing her child by denying the kid medical care. One voicemail was from the police letting me know she filed a complaint, how I could get a copy from my attorney, and inquiring about whether I wanted to file a countercomplaint. I sure did. I moved out of state, and the prosecutor called me once just to ask questions. Then I never heard back from the prosecutor. The last I heard from the kiddo's grandmother was that the snake took a plea bargain, Dad got custody, and Grandma was enjoying a lot more time with the kiddo. The next story is titled, Parents Prefer Incest Over Me Being Happy. I've, 21 male, been in a surprisingly successful relationship for the past year and a half ever since I moved to Europe to start my studies. Honestly, I didn't think I'd hold it together this long, but hey, the girl actually likes me. Shocker, she's honestly perfect. Spiritually, she is a neckbeard, and I love her for it. My parents, not so much. Not because of her personality, they don't care about little things like that. She's European, and that's the problem. My parents belong to a minority in the Middle East. We believe in a lot of things, but the kicker is that if you marry outside your faith, you get excommunicated. Disowned, not allowed back in the village, the whole shebang. And since there are so few of us, privileges are handed out so that finding the love of your life would still be possible. The dude down the street assault a child? It's fine. We'll just introduce my daughter to him. I'm sure he's a good man. Son fell in love with your niece? It's fine. Matters of the heart are complicated. Your daughter fell in love with an Englishman after 8 years of living in England? Burn her at the stake. I feel like my mom genuinely thought that I was going to move back home to the village and meet someone there like she and her siblings did, but surprise, surprise, I wasn't a fan of it. Especially since her siblings consist of her sister, who married a man 20 years younger than her, her brother, who married his cousin, and her other brother, who's on his third marriage with a woman who can only be described as a vanilla-flavored biscuit. Ever since I got into a relationship, my parents have been relatively supportive. I feel like my mom was just glad I'm not gay, since I wasn't like the other boys in high school, and my dad, in true dad fashion, was just happy I was getting some. 1.5 years later, they started showing their concern. My dad regularly sits me down for talks about our heritage, and my mom regularly jokes about setting me up with my future bride. Whenever I bring up something remotely serious about my girlfriend, they get visibly upset. I'm in a position right now where I possibly have to move cities. The fact that I want to stay where I am because I'm not exactly enthusiastic about leaving my girlfriend and the life I've built here caused them to short-circuit. All of a sudden, my poor academic performance wasn't due to my many mental health problems or COVID, or just my lack of interest in the subject. It was the witch who seduced me and led me astray. Because their golden boy is definitely incapable of making poor decisions himself. So yeah, it got to a point where they're trying their hardest to force me to move cities just to get away from my girlfriend. They're arguing about it every phone call now, and if I just give it time, they're going to add the financial pressure on top of that. That's fun. I just really hope they mellow out soon. If not for me, for my siblings' sakes. I'm the oldest, so I get the brunt of the generational friction, but I only hope it gets better when they get older. The last story is titled, Narcissistic Parents Wanted Me to Trade Houses with Them because I got a slightly better one, and then literally stole my air conditioners when I refused to give them money. I'm going to start this off by saying that if you have a house and don't have cameras, get cameras. I have some now, but I should have gotten them sooner. I live in a pretty typical manufactured home in Arizona. My parents also live in one just a few streets over. Despite how close we are, I'm VLC because they are just bad people. They treated me okay as a kid, but things changed as soon as I was in my late teens. I was expected to do more and pay my way as soon as I finished high school. That was fair. I was an adult by then after all. But my parents wanted a lot more in rent than what I'd have to pay to get my apartment. I'd have had next to nothing left of my monthly paycheck if I'd given them what they wanted. So I refused to give them more than a fair amount, plus a share in utilities. And I started buying my own food as well. My father openly said this was not good enough, and my parents actually filed official paperwork to evict me when I refused to cater to their demands. I left home and got an apartment with my best friend. 5 years later, and I bought my own house in a neighborhood not far from my parents'. It's just an old, manufactured home on a small property, but it was so damn cheap that I couldn't turn it down. And my monthly mortgage isn't bad either. I even moved my best friend in to help me cover the bills. We were already used to living in the same space, and the house gave us much more room. I may even let another friend move in to get some more rent money for the mortgage because we've got one room that's actually left unused right now since the house is a 3-bedroom. My parents, though, somehow didn't like my independence from them. Did they want me to fail or something? I don't know. But the incident that caused the VLC was when they demanded I trade houses with them. Yes, you read that correctly. They actually wanted to trade. Their manufactured home is smaller and older than mine and has one less bedroom. And their yard is smaller too. Not that either of us has any grass. It is Arizona after all. When they first saw my place, they looked pissed. After a couple more visits, my father actually said it wasn't fair that I was doing better than them, and I was rubbing my nicer house in their faces. It's just an old manufactured home in one of the hottest states in the U.S. Seriously, what's to brag about? But I guess having something even slightly better than what my parents had irked them. And as I've already said, they actually demanded we trade houses because of it. My friend who lives with me literally fell onto the couch laughing when they said that, and I couldn't help but join in. My father said it was not funny, and to give him what he wants. When I recovered my composure, I said he and my mother were not entitled to my house or anything I own, for that matter, and then told them to get the duck out. After that, we barely spoke. And then the pandemic hit. It didn't really change my life much. I like the peace and quiet, and my friend knows to leave me alone most of the time. My father, however, got laid off, and he struggled to find another job. He ended up working in the local MARTA walls for half a year before getting a better paying job. I did get a kick out of seeing him there when I was shopping for groceries. But as much as I hate him, I'm not going to call him a bad employee. He actually did fine. But during that time, he and my mother kept calling me and asking for money. And I know what y'all are thinking. Don't lend them anything. They didn't want loans. They wanted handouts. Why? Because they raised me, and I owed them. I said if they didn't want the cost of raising a kid, they shouldn't have had one. A few weeks ago, though, my mother called me begging for money because their dinosaur of a window AC unit finally crapped out. I told them I was not giving them anything, and they were too cheap to replace that old AC unit for a long time. So I wasn't going to buy them a new one. My mother then complained about how I have 2 in my house, and the least I could do is give them one. I then said that maybe if she and my father weren't always pissing away their money on beer and MJ all the time, they'd have the money to buy another AC. Then I said I wasn't giving them one of mine or any money. End of story. Only it wasn't the end of the story. A few days later, I came home from work to find my house had been broken into. My front door locks were drilled out and both of my window AC units were gone. Nothing else was stolen, but they went out of their way to make a huge mess for some stupid reason, probably to make it look like a typical robbery or something. I knew it had to have been my parents and called the police. I told police that I heavily suspected my parents of the theft because they act entitled to my stuff, even though I'm a grown man that doesn't live with them. I went with police to my parents' house, and sure enough, they had both my AC units going in their windows. When confronted, my parents obviously denied the theft, then claimed they already owned the AC units. But statements from their neighbors said otherwise, but my parents still denied the theft. I'd bought both AC units used online years ago, which means I had no receipts for them. So I figured my only option was to look for witnesses in my own neighborhood. And as luck would have it, a neighbor across the street has security cameras, and the edge of one of them caught just enough to see my parents showing up in my father's truck. My father could be seen walking with a cordless power drill in hand, and a few minutes later they came back to the truck with my AC units, then went back in to ransack the place, I'm guessing. With this evidence in hand, police had cause to arrest my parents. At first, both of them acted like they'd done nothing wrong. But I convinced the police to let me do the talking. I said they could either return the AC units to my home and clean up the mess they made, or I'd let the police arrest them both right there. They'd already stolen from me, lied to police, trespassed, vandalized my house, broke my front door locks, and there was video evidence of what they'd done. If I pressed charges, they were both going to jail for sure. My parents looked deflated, then asked for a moment to talk with each other in their bedroom. I heard a lot of shouting from both of them, and I could hear my mother yelling that my father was an idiot, and he was trying to blame me in turn. After about 5 minutes of that, they came back out looking even more deflated and said they'll return the AC units and stop bothering me for money if I didn't press charges. I said they were going to clean up the mess in my house and buy new locks for my front door as well. And then I wanted written apologies from both of them on top of it. They begrudgingly agreed and even got a police escort back to my house. My father was forced to put the AC units back in my windows and then left my mother to clean up the huge mess they made while he went out and bought replacement locks for my front door. He was gone about an hour and came back with a new stainless steel lock set to replace the knob and deadbolt. Then he had to help my mother finish cleaning. During this time, I let the two cops just sit and watch them while drinking soda. They said it was very entertaining. After everything was cleaned up, I gave my parents each a piece of paper and a pencil, then told them to write out apologies to me for what they'd done. My father looked especially pissed and said I was treating him like a child. I said he was acting like one and never stopped treating me as a child either. This was just me holding him accountable, and I could have sent him to jail, but I felt like this was better for teaching him a lesson. He then kind of snorted and started writing. My mother wrote out a good apology, but my father was pretty half-assed and passive-aggressive. But I didn't care. It seemed to kill him a little inside to have to do it. And when he was done, he left without speaking to me. My mother said she was sorry and she'd leave me alone, then followed after him. The two cops said they thought the whole thing was hilarious and then thanked me for giving them an excuse to take a break while on the job before leaving. Not long after, I shelled out to get some cameras for the exterior of my house. So if someone tries to break in again, I'll get it on video. I only have 2 cameras, but added a couple more fake ones that look real enough just to scare people off. I haven't heard a peep from my parents, but their next-door neighbor told me they went and bought a new AC unit. Guess they had the money for one after all. Makes me wonder how high they were when they thought it was a good idea to steal from me. Maybe having lean pockets for a while will teach them. Then again, they are who they are after all.